during the summer when school was out, within walking distance, several miles, but in my neighborhood there was four theaters. There's the White Palace, the Central, the Gold, and the 20th and the 20th Century. And so I used to go to every one of them. I would go to maybe two or three of them every day. I would go watch a movie, and then go right across the street, watch another movie. Of course, then there were, back in those days, they had those Western matinees, and all those cowboy, ones with Gene Autry and Roy Rogers and all of that. So I spent a lot of time in the theater, watching movies. The first time I thought about making a movie was 1968 or 1969, and a friend of mine who actually starred in like three different motorcycle movies. He just caught on with a guy named Herschel Lewis, who was producing all of these motorcycle movies. And Jungle Sam was his nickname. His real name was Steve White. And we got in my Volkswagen bus in middle of winter, and we were going to drive to Florida because we were going to help this guy make a movie. And it was hell of a trip. We got there and nothing worked out right, and we almost got stranded on the beach because the tide was coming in and we couldn't find a road going out and everything. And the water, the ocean, the salt water came up pretty high because when we were driving back to Illinois to Chicago, it all froze up, in my Volkswagen. Anyway, that's the first time that I even thought about that. Never thought about it again. And the way I got into the business is I was a still photographer for many years. I still do a lot of still photography, but I started out in the '60s as a still photographer, and then when I moved to Durango, that's in '72, I continued to do still photography, but then I got a job working at Purgatory. I was a photographer for the resort, supplying all of the photos for the brochures and collateral material and all of that. And all of a sudden, this big Hollywood movie company moves into town. It was Roger Corman,
Mm-hmm.
and that was my first movie, Roger Corman movie. And they they had two cinematographers, and they hired this person in L.A. that was going to be the still photographer on this movie. And because she said she could ski, but she really couldn't. She was she taught beginning ski, so she couldn't ski with these guys down through the trees and everything. So they asked around about me, and at that time I was the ski photographer. I was in Powder Magazine, Ski Magazine. I was pretty well known. So they hired me. No one told me anything. So the first day, I'm I'm shooting horizontals and I'm shooting verticals too, And the cinematographer, who's a French guy, I can't think of his name right now. I will though. He and his crew were all. He's the only one who spoke English. Anyway, he tapped me on the shoulder and he says, "There's no vertical in movies. If you take a movie camera and turn it like this, that it turns on its side." So that was my first lesson. Mia Farrow came over to me one day during the day while we were shooting and everything, and said, "Oh, I'm trying to study photography. Would you teach me?" So I started teaching her a little bit of photography, as we worked on the movie. But so that was the first movie that I worked on as a still photographer. Pierre Willie Glenn was the cinematographer, the French guy I talked about. He taught me more than anything because what he would do, he would set up the shot. See, and I was supposed to be right under the sticks, so I could shoot stills of what the same stuff that he's getting in a movie camera, but they would use the stills for the brochures and so forth. Um, Even though they were supplying me with movie film for my still camera, you know. But anyway, so yeah, he taught me that. He would set up the thing and everything, tell me to get up in a chair, And then he showed how he was going to zoom in, how he was going to back out, how he was going to pan, and why he was going to do this, why he was doing that. So I learned a lot from him. And by the time the movie was over with, I wasn't an expert, of course, but I learned a lot about how it worked. And when that was all over with, um, I started getting calls because I did a lot of scouting for him too. Besides, because I was familiar with the area, so I started getting calls from LA to do scouting. Most started out with commercials, and then movies of the week and that sort of thing. So I was a location scout for quite some time, and then I became a location manager. And then it went on and on and on until I was producing and directing. I belong to the Directors Guild, um, DGA, Directors Guild of America. But one summer, I spent the entire summer in Alamosa, Colorado, because I finished Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade because I did all of the locations for the opening of that movie, and immediately started on another movie with Willie Nelson and Jack Elam called Where the Hell's That Gold? And so I was there for the whole thing. And about that time, I got divorced, and my wife moved back to Illinois, and the two boys didn't want to go to Illinois. So the director of the Colorado Film Commission, his name was Carol Smith, Carol with a K, and he'd been after me for a couple of years to come to work at the Film Commission. So that's what I did. So I was an assistant director at the Colorado Film Commission for about 4 or 5 years, and I started a program that I would go around all over Colorado and teach the Chamber of Commerce or anybody that particular town, that location, that city uh, wanted to be their liaison with film people if they came in scouting locations. So I would go train them, and so I started this whole program. And then they decided that they would let me come back to Durango, which was where I lived for 34, 35 years or so. But I got back to Durango, and I was the film commissioner of an 11 county film commission of Western Colorado. So 11 counties, this one and everything that you can think of that goes down along the edge, and all the way up to Rifle and, you know, so forth. And so I did that for 4 or 5 years. And then I got tired of the government, you know, job. So I decided to go back into production. Well, when you're out of the loop in Hollywood, you're out of the loop. And I was older even, so people thought I was even dead. Some thought I was dead at the time. So I couldn't get a job. It was very difficult. I got a job here and a job there and stuff. So I said, well, I guess the only way I can really work on another movie is if I make my own. I started writing, and I just couldn't stop writing. I've got like 12 feature-length screenplays. In my two of them have been produced. I'd like to make a movie here. I'm thinking about. I got a western that could be shot in this part of Colorado, and I'm working on it, and we'll see what happens. Paul was very interesting. He 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 didn't. I didn't know that he took it so he could play Bela Lugosi. I didn't know that until he was doing an interview for a television station in Florida, and I was sitting there listening. I was right there, and that's when I found out. When he started doing Bela Lugosi. But Paul's a very interesting guy. He studied opera when he was, a kid. Always thought he'd be an opera singer, and he was very good. And he would sing opera at the drop of a hat. We'd be out to lunch somewhere in L.A., and someone would see him and say, "Paul, sing," and he'd stand up and he'd do opera. It was the first feature film I directed. I directed a lot of feature documentaries, you know. But it's quite different, of course. But I'd watch so many directors work and everything. Didn't bother me at all. I just did it. I'm not very nice when I'm directing, and my wife will say, "Yeah, you scare people." It's just because it's so, everything has to be done within a certain period of time. You can't fart around because it's money. You make a mistake, it's money. Like we're working on Where the Hell's That Gold? And everything was on a train. By the way, we burned down a classic historic bridge in that movie by accident. There was a scene on the train where they needed to get water. So the train stopped and there was a river, and they were going to go over and take this bathtub, this round, like 1800s kind of bathtub, and it was supposed to take that out, go to the river, fill it with water, and put it into the train in the engine. Well, it wasn't there. They forgot it back in Alamosa, which was like about a 3 hour back and forth trip. So someone had to go get it, and they did everything they could, in the meantime, all the little close up dialogue and stuff like that. But so that just gives you an idea. You can't make a mistake. So I stopped by the production office and told the people, I said, all right, I'm taking off for Durango. They said, you're not going to the bridge? I said, no, why? I said, the bridge is burning down. No. So sure enough, go there, and this historic wooden bridge, creosote soaked, of course. And the way it all happened was the night before, the special effects guy, Joe Mercurio, came over and said, Tony, lose the water truck. We won't use it tomorrow. I said, no, we're gonna start a fire on the bridge. He said, no, no, no. Bert's just gonna do a dust bomb down in the Arroyo. The bridge goes across a dry Arroyo down here. He's just gonna do a dust bomb instead. So we don't need the water truck. It's only $150. I said, yeah, but we're not gonna have any fire. So okay, so I called again, got rid of him. So what happened was they got down there, and Bert and the camera crew was down below in the Aurora shooting up at the bridge, and they did the dust bomb, and Bert didn't think it was good enough. So he told Joe, he said, give me a little fire up there. Just give me a little flash of fire. Joe said, no, it's really dangerous. It's all this creosote wood. Take a handheld fire extinguisher up and just give me a little flash. So he said, okay. So he went up there, he did that, and the whole bridge caught on fire. I mean, it just went up like it was gas was pouring. So the bridge is burning, man, and so it's getting really hot down there. And so Bert says, the crew says, we better get out of here. He said, no, we're going to have to pay for this. We're going to shoot it. So they shot the bridge burning. But on Monday morning, the crew came to work. But you got to remember, the name of this movie is Where the Hell's That Gold? The crew came with T-shirts that said, where the hell's that bridge? So I did a movie. It was the first time they ever shot in Mesa Verde in one of the cliff dwellings. It was actually Spruce Tree House. And I made that happen because I kind of knew the director of the National Monument. And so nobody wanted us to do it. I mean, but we did it. We got it finished. So the next year, or maybe 7, 8 months later, I get a call from a guy named Art Rapolo, and he says, "Tony," he said, "Yeah." He said, "Are you the guy who did that movie in Mesa Verde?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well," I said, "we got a movie that we're kind of working on," and I said, "Oh yeah, what's the name?" He said, "It's a little movie. It's called My Life as a Boy Scout." I said, "Oh, okay." So he said, "My boss and I'd like to come and scout." So I said, "All right." So they came. I picked them up at the airport, and we started helicoptering all over the place, because I used to do a lot of helicopter scouting. And they got done, and came back and said, "Yeah, we're going to do it here. But we can't use this train. Is there another train we can use?" I said, "Yeah, there's the one that is out of Antonito and goes to Chama, New Mexico. That's a Cumbres Toltec Railroad. It's narrow gauge train, just like the Durango train." So I said, "Oh, okay. Well, we can do that. Blah blah blah." So then I get the call from Art. Art says, "Tony, can you come to L.A. because Frank would like to talk to you because he wants to hire you to do all the scouting and the preliminary stuff for the movie." I said, "Okay." So I called. I had this junky old car. So I called up a friend of mine who was in the movie business. Actually, lived in Durango for a while. David, he lived in Westlake. I said, "I gotta come to L.A. Can I stay at your house?" He said, "Yeah, come on." So I get to his house. We're eating supper and everything, and reading. He says, where are you going tomorrow?" I said, "I'm going to Universal." So what are you doing there? I said, "I've got this meeting with a guy named Frank Marshall." And he went, Frank Marshall? You have a meeting with Frank Marshall? Well, Frank Marshall is, here's Spielberg's office, here's Frank's office, here's Kathleen Kennedy, who married Frank Marshall eventually. And they produced all the big movies with him. So holy shit, now I'm really worried. So now I'm driving into LA. I drive up to the gate, and sure enough, I had to drive on past, gave my name, my junky old car. So yeah, follow the yellow or the purple line or whatever it was, and you'll come to it. You can't miss it because it looks like you're in Santa Fe. It's the studio, um, Amblin Entertainment, as Spielberg's first movie. Yeah, and you can't miss it. So I'm driving. Sure enough, I see this huge, you know, Spanish style place, and it's kind of had a little thing going down, and I was kind of, I didn't want to drive down in there, because I didn't, park down there. I was pretty impressed and nervous and everything. So right across the street, there was a little parking area, had like four cars parked, four spaces and three cars parked, and one was empty. So I pulled my car in there and I parked it. I got out, I walked down, and sure enough, I had the meeting, everything. They hired me, all that stuff. So I come back to get in my car, and there's a cop standing there. He said, "Is this your car?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "This is Don Johnson's parking place." I said, "No shit." I said, "Okay, I'm gonna move." And I realized my keys were locked up in the car, and there was this much space in the windows. I was so nervous, right? So he brought a hanger, and we got the keys out, and I got out of there and everything. So that was my Indiana Jones story. But it was very interesting. I got to meet Phoenix a lot. Lunchtime, because he kind of liked me. And we would usually sit at the same table and bullshit and talk. And I almost did another movie with him, but he died right when we were prepping it. I already started it. That was the biggest thing I ever did. And everything you see in the opening of the movie, when they get to cross the Cortez, and he's on the horse, and the cars are chasing him. Then he gets on the train, right, with the snake car and the animal car, and then gets out at his house. Actually found exactly what the artist drew for Indy's house, young Indy's house. It was in Antonito, 17th and 18th, and at ZENZEN Gardens, Paonia. There's flyers out all over the place. And if you just go to the website, ZENZEN Gardens, you'll see my picture and the dates and all the other stuff.